Welcome back to another exciting episode and collaboration between the History of the Papacy podcast and the History in the Bible podcast. I'm Steve, and today, of course, I'm joined by Garry. Garry, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Today, we are going to delve into our next group of minor prophets, but they're not minor to us. They're major. And if you've jumped in the middle, I would suggest going back and listening to our other episodes on the other minor prophets in our introductory episode. You can also just listen to it today too, because it's good, and then listen to it again. Today we are going to focus in on two spectacular minor prophets. One you might be more knowledgeable of, and the other one might be a new minor prophet for your enjoyment. Today we are talking about none other than Obadiah and Jonah. So Garry, let's talk a little bit about our dear friend Obadiah.
Obadiah. I hate the book of Obadiah. I hate the prophet Obadiah. Can't stand him. The book is an unrelenting and mercifully short rant against Judah's southern neighbour Edom. Edom was due south of the southern kingdom of Judah. We don't really know how big it was, but it probably extended down to the Gulf of Aqaba and had a port there. Edom seems to have been the very epitome of a tin-pot kingdom. There is nothing in Edom except wasteland, but it did have the big advantage that the king's highway from the Gulf of Aqaba ran through it. So it's probably full of, brigands waylaying camel trains as they were trying to get to Mesopotamia. Obadiah, or in Hebrew, Obadiah, is the shortest book in the Bible, 300 Hebrew words, and depending how you translate it, 600 English words. It is my aim to become the world's foremost authority on Obadiah. After all, it's only 600 words.
It's basically an extended Facebook rant against the Edomites. If Obadiah wrote this, if he actually did write it, and if he wrote it today, it would be an extended Facebook rant that people would probably like out of sympathy and then scroll on.
Obadiah would have loved Facebook, wouldn't he? the I Hate Edom page, of which he would be a regular contributor. Well, hang on, let's get through, I suppose, a few quotes from Obadiah so you can get a little hint of its sheer ghastliness. Now, Obadiah has only one chapter. Traditionally, in one-chapter books, you don't get a chapter reference. So Obadiah 1 is the first verse of Obadiah, not the first chapter. Anyway, here we go. Obadiah 1. The prophecy of Obadiah. Thus said my Lord God concerning Edom, I will make you least among nations. You shall be most despised. Your arrogant heart has seduced you, you who dwell in clefts of the rock. In your lofty abode you think in your heart, who can pull me down to earth? Should you nest as high as an eagle, even from there I will pull you down, declares the Lord. That's the opening 4 verses. He's not keen on Edom. Why? We find that out a few verses later, when the prophet writes, verse 10, For the slaughter and violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aside, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were like one of them.
I had read, and there's a website I'll usually check out first called myjewishlearning.com, and it seems legit enough. They said that there was some rabbinical sources that said that Obadiah may have been a convert to Judaism who was also an Edomite by birth. So he's kind of like a self-hating Edomite.
What is it said that converts are always the most fanatical?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose if he was an Edomite, that would explain it. Now, the book of Obadiah is a rant against Edom for its portrayal of Judah. We don't really know the context. The best bet is that it's referring to when Babylon came and attacked and eventually conquered Judah. The book seems to be complaining that the kingdom of Edom did not come to Judah's aid. Now, I don't know what Edom could have done. Edom was probably even poorer than Judah. Babylon at the time was a vast military machine, having at your back some friends who are not going to help you.
Yeah, they don't give us any context to say why the Edomites were obliged to do anything to help the Israelites or Judah. So then the main topic really is the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 by the Babylonians and the supposed actions of Edom against Judah at that time. The Edomites were regarded as the kin of the Jews, and since they were both descended from they were both descended of Isaac, one through Jacob and one through Esau, the Edomites did not behave as brothers to the Jews in their worst hour, which is kind of interesting. Maybe we can discuss that later, as if they felt themselves to be kin in the same, or co-religionists, or if this was a whole Yahwehist idea. I mean, there's a lot to dissect there. But anyways, Edom serves as both a reference to the nation of that name and also to the foreign nations in general. Subsequently, Jews identified Edom with Rome and later with Christendom. For them, the book of Obadiah referred, at least in part, to the events in the Second Temple or to future events associated with Messianic era. So then we flash back to this wonderful story of the nice Esau and the nasty Jacob Israel. That's one of the greatest stories. I say this every time. All these stories are just so entertaining. And very short, Isaac's wife Rebekah is determined to swindle her own eldest son Esau, the hairy one. Like, he was so hairy, like his body was like a sheep's hair almost. But she wanted to swindle the eldest, Esau, who was really the one who should have gotten everything out of his inheritance, because Esau married a Hittite woman. The Hittites, they're another great one. Maybe that's for a future series. We were talking about the enemies of Israel. So you really can't have Esau getting his cut of the pie, so to speak, when he's married that Hittite woman.
Nah, nasty Hittites.
The Bible hammers home that the imperative that you cannot do out of Israelite marriage. Rebekah has decided that their youngest son, Jacob, is the rightful heir, and he's the most colorful of the patriarchs, the resourceful trickster, the equivalent of Odysseus in the Greek myths. And is he the one who has the wonderful coat, too?
Oh, it is too, yeah. No, not Jacob, Joseph.
Joseph, yeah. So not even when Esau cries, "Have you only one single blessing, Father? Bless me also, Father," can he ever sway the ever passive and ever duped Isaac? Naturally, Esau is deeply unhappy about this turn of events, and at the instigation of his duplicitous mother, Rebekah, Jacob flees Esau's vengeance. You really do. Esau's got a major point for wanting to get some vengeance.
Yeah. And the Bible is very clear it's on the side of Rebekah and Jacob, who are swindling poor Isaac, firstly, the dad, and they're swindling Esau. Oh, it's a great moral.
And then Esau, in the end, he comes and, asks for forgiveness and, wants to paper over everything, and he still comes out as the bad guy.
Yeah, he's still depicted as the bad guy, even though Jacob admits he's done wrong. He confronts Esau. Basically, they had two little armies. He confronts Esau expecting to be done over something severe, and Esau says, "Not a problem, brother, I forgive you." So Esau is depicted as the nice one, but the book of Genesis is still, its sympathies are with Loki, not with Thor.
Yeah, that is really a theme that cuts through the Old Testament as the guy who you were like, yeah, what did he do? What was so bad? And then that's the person who we said this off microphone, but it always seems to be the guy who you're rooting for gets thrown under the bus.
And the Bible lists the generations, the descendants of Esau, who goes off to a strange land. That's one thing the Bible makes clear. Jacob, who's later renamed Israel, gets to settle in Canaan, whereas Esau disperses for parts unknown, but has many children, all of whom are deemed to be, the founders of some tribe near Judah, and in particular the Edomites. And the descendants of poor old hapless Esau are always depicted by the Judeans as, the enemy, or I suppose it'd be like the Serbs and the Croats. They're really very similar ethnically, but gee, we really don't like you.
Yeah, I think that is a good analogy that all of these groups would have historically been so similar to each other, practiced very similar religious elements, but they're the other. And, it was probably smart for the people who had lived in Edom, so to speak, to stay as far away from the Babylonians as they possibly could.
And actually, you've got a point. Geographically, Edom was as far from Babylon as you could get without being Egypt.
And they're in an area where they can protect themselves and hole up in mountain redoubts, where that's something that an army like the Babylonians necessarily wouldn't want to go into.
Yeah.
So, hey, let these kingdoms to the north deal with it themselves.
So there was perpetual bad blood between the Judeans and the Edomites. Little kingdom of Edom, we don't have a good history for it at all. There's just names. It seems to have transformed into the area called Idumea in at least Persian or Greek times. Idumea is the Greek word, I suppose, for Edom, or it's a variant of it. Idumea was an independent area since forever. Maybe the Babylonians captured it, conquered it, we don't know. Maybe the Persians did, we don't really know. The Maccabean kings of Israel eventually conquered it because they believed they had some sort of claim to it, I suppose. And and they conquered it and converted its inhabitants to Judaism. So it's clear that Idumea, just south of the old kingdom of Judah, was not Jewish, or at least not Jewish enough for the Maccabean kings. King Herod was from Idumea, and that was one of the things held against him through Herod's long and rather crazy reign. He was only half Jewish or semi-Jewish, or, you're a convert, you're not real. So the bad blood between the Jews and Edom/Idumea went on for centuries and centuries and centuries.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I wonder how different they really were culturally, linguistically, religiously. I mean, they must have been pretty similar. Maybe you can share that Edom in Psalm 137. People hear a lot about the Psalms, but this probably isn't a psalm that's going to get shared at Sunday school.
Yes, Psalm 137. This is one of the few other places in the Old Testament where Edom is mentioned. Now, Psalm 137 actually starts off with the famous "By the rivers of Babylon." By the rivers of Babylon. You know how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered the group that did that back in the 70s, they're actually German.
Oh, that's interesting.
Anyway, so Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept, when we remembered Zion. That's the most famous verse from the psalm. What you don't hear are verses 7 to 9. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down, down to its foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator. Happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rocks.
Yeah, that's verses 7 through 9 somehow didn't get turned into a hippie song in the 60s. Like that famous turn, turn, turn by the birds
Oh, yeah.
from Ecclesiastes, and then by the rivers of Babylon. Verses 7 through 8 of Psalm 137 didn't quite have the ring to them.
It's funny how all the violent bits get filtered out, isn't it, in the Bible?
And the Old Testament really is filled with a lot of violent bits.
Christians have no interest in Obadiah. It barely appears in lectionary readings. Jews marginally find it more compelling. It appears as only one reading in the annual cycle. So Obadiah is not on anyone's radar, and it is the least popular book cited in the entire Bible, according to Bible Gateway.
Yeah, that was my big takeaway from Obadiah, and what I saw is that the Catholics don't have much to say about it. It's just basically, oh, yeah, Obadiah, it's in there.
Yeah.
Let's move on. It's a little weird. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
But let's move on. I think these two books that we've chosen for today really they mesh well together because it's opposite ends of the spectrum of how people view it. It's kind of like on the seesaw. Obadiah is way at the bottom, but this book, Jonah, is riding high, and that's the next minor prophet we're going to talk about, the book of Jonah. And I think Jonah, that's really, if you're going to take the Sunday school version, I think most people know at least the first quarter of Jonah very well. Can you give us a short summary of Jonah and maybe give us a little bit of its setting?
Yeah. In the book of Jonah, a man called Jonah, who is not said to be the author of the book. So we're not talking about a prophet called Jonah. We're talking about a book whose title is the name of the protagonist, not the author, as opposed to the other prophets. So there's Jonah, and the book doesn't say anything about his background. It doesn't even say he's Jewish. It says nothing about the time, except we know it's in the time of Assyria. God comes to Jonah and tells him, I got a task for you. Oh, I'm on it. Great. What have I got to do? Well, you know Assyria. Yeah, the most feared power in the world.
Heard of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it. The invincible war machine. Well, says God, I want you to go to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, and I want you to convert them to my ways. Say what? Jonah is deeply unimpressed. He immediately does what any sane person would do and runs in the opposite direction to Assyria. He heads for the Mediterranean coast. And there he sets sail on a ship for Tarshish.
I saw that Tarshish could be a couple of different places. It could be Carthage. There's some scholarship that says it could be in Spain.
Spain?
Yeah. My take is that Tarshish was probably a metaphor for saying that he's going to go as far away as he could.
Yeah. Now, this is the only part of the story that most people know. He's on board the boat and a furious storm arises. And they're all going, oh, man, how do we get out of this storm? We must have really done something wrong. The mariners and Jonah are debating what should we do. And then they all become extraordinarily moral. Because they're saying, well, one of us should sacrifice himself to the sea gods. They have a Spartacus moment. No, I'll do it. No, I'll do it. No, I'll do it. I can't really see that happening on a ship. Eventually Jonah says, okay, I think I'm in trouble with my God, so I shall throw myself off the ship. Good show, sir. Best of British, etc. Off you go. And Jonah is thrown overboard. And then comes the bit that we all know. He spends 3 days and nights in the belly of a fish and is then regurgitated onto land. And at that point, he commences his journey to Assyria. Now, this story, I think it's only maybe one chapter out of several in the book. It's only a little portion of it.
It's maybe 25%.
Yeah, maybe at that. And it is not the point of the book at all. It's just a zany little folktale inserted into the book. But that's all the people know. Anyway, eventually Jonah, he actually goes to Nineveh, preaches there, and he's thinking, this is not going to go well. I am going to be killed by the most murderous people on the planet. To his utter shock, they follow his advice and they convert to God's ways. And at that point, Jonah is, well, how would you describe it?
I mean, he's almost apoplectic.
At his success.
Yeah. It's absolute 100% mission accomplished success. And Jonah is, I mean, almost ready to kill himself over it.
He is so disappointed. He has a little rant at God saying, why didn't you destroy them? Well, Jonah, you actually did, you succeeded. They converted. Everything is fine. And Jonah is utterly distraught. And the book closes with God saying to Jonah, hey, I can forgive who I like. And it worked.
Yeah, it really ends up like it's almost like the exact opposite of the God of the Old Testament. He's like, I'm trying to be merciful here, guys. Come on, give me a break, Jonah. I said I was going to be merciful. I told you I was a merciful God, and then that's what I'm doing here.
Some take the book as saying that it's making a point, that God is concerned with the whole world, not just with Israel.
I think it's a really bizarre book. I can't imagine the motivation of the writer. I think that the beginning 25%, I'm almost guaranteed in my mind that the author saw basking sharks have a gigantic mouth that looks like it could suck up a person. And I mean, I think they have had where like scuba divers have gotten sucked in and they're able to work themselves out. But I think that first part of the book was a complete fantasy by the author of just like something cool that he saw and he wanted to write it down and include it in his narrative. Like an author's inspired by seeing a big mountain or something and they want to include it in their book. And then the second 3/4, it's really Jonah throwing a temper tantrum. I don't think there's any other way you could really explain it, is that he didn't do what God says in the first place. Like, God's being pretty reasonable in the first, go to Nineveh. He refuses to go to Nineveh. Finally, after he gets barfed up by a gigantic fish, which that is what the translation is I believe in Greek it was keto something, and that's an interesting little etymology thing, is that whale comes from the King James Version. That's how they translated it, because eventually that term was associated with whale, the Greek term. But in Greek, it was just fish, so it had been differentiated throughout the ages that Greek term went from just a generic for fish to a specific to whales. But it is also interesting that I had no idea that basking sharks or sperm whales lived in the Eastern Mediterranean and that they migrate there, which is even more interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they do go out into the Atlantic and then come back into the Mediterranean. I'm not exactly sure for what purpose.
So they always manage to find the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yeah, that's a pretty narrow body of water for, huge aquatic animals to swim through. Like I said, I think that that's pure fiction just for an interesting plot element.
See, I find it the funniest book in the Bible because it's just a hoot that Jonah runs away.
Yeah, runs away, comes back.
And in fact, it is the only funny book I can think of. The Bible, in my reading, is not packed with jokes.
No, it's not it's definitely not a jokey.
No, it's not jokey. It's not satirical. There's not much irony in it. But Jonah, it has to me, it has a lightness of touch and a levity which you don't find anywhere else.
Especially in the as they go on into the narrative, that last quarter where Jonah he's going to lay down and die, and God plants that tree over him to shade him, and then Jonah wants it to die. I think he's still, and I think that's probably the part where maybe the Christians, and I don't know so much the Jews, and I don't know if that's what we're supposed to get out of it, but like, you got to back off, Jonah. God keeps trying, like, throwing you a rope, like, come on, get with the program here. I've done everything that I'm going to say I'm going to do, and you're still, like, rejecting what he has to say at every single step. And that's the thing that I think is bizarre about the book, is they never solve that. They never tell us what we're supposed to think about that. I think that's the natural inference that you would draw out of that, is that Jonah, for some reason, is never absorbing the message that God's trying to give to him. And they never tell us what we're supposed to take out of that.
Yeah. I mean, God is uncharacteristically reasonable in this book, isn't he?
Yeah, totally reasonable.
Yeah, totally reasonable. He doesn't threaten anyone. He forgives instantly. It's sort of like, oh, Jonah, not again. As opposed to thunder and lightning and threats. So I think that contributes to its lightness, since God in a lot of the other books is full of death, doom and destruction for anyone that disobeys him. Now, in the Christian tradition, Jonah only pops up really his time in the fish, whale, whatever. 3 days, 3 nights. Okay, obviously a metaphor for Jesus' death and resurrection. You're spinning a lot out of one tiny little fraction of this book.
Yeah, the 3 days in the tomb.
The Jews see the book, apparently it's I didn't know this, it occupies a fairly important place in the Jewish liturgy. It is recited on Yom Kippur afternoon, and Yom Kippur is one of the most important holidays in the Jewish calendar.
Yeah, I didn't know this. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of it being part of a reading on at Easter or Christmas, I suppose. And apparently they take from the book the notion of God's universal love for humanity, and that anyone, even the most wicked of the wicked, like the Assyrians, can repent and be forgiven. So they take away a much bigger lesson, I think, than the Christians do.
I just wish that message had been driven home more in the text. It just doesn't seem to be, you can draw that out of the text, but I think if you wanted to say that was really the purpose of the text, you needed just a little bit more at the end to make that point, literarily.
Yeah, God only really reappears in the very final verses, doesn't he? The final chapter is chapter 4, and it starts off with Jonah being really annoyed that he succeeded. So chapter 4, this displeased Jonah greatly, and he was grieved. He prayed to the Lord, saying, O Lord, isn't this just what I said when I was still in my own country? That is why I fled beforehand. For I know now that you are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in kindness. And Jonah hates that. So Jonah goes, God plants a tree. God talks to Jonah, and Jonah says, I would rather die than live, and I want the tree to die too. Okay.
And God's like, hey, I made this tree, back off.
Yeah, exactly. And the final verses of the book are, Then the Lord said, You cared about the plant which you did not work for, and which you did not grow, which appeared overnight and perished overnight. And should not I care about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons?
I just think with these 12, if you're going to include them in the writings, they're pretty short. They should have a theme that just punches you in the face. Like I have an anthology of Philip K. Dick of his short stories, and they're like 10 pages at the most. And you read them and you get the point from them. And that's what I would really love with these. I think that these 12 would be perfect if they're like, boom, here's a nice story, here's the point, and let's move on. That's what I kind of like about the New Testament, like with when Jesus gives the parables, it's like, boom, here you go, here's a quick little story, and here's the point, get it? Now let's do another short story.
Yeah.
And you don't get at least from Jonah and Obadiah, you're not getting that quick one-liner, here's the point. It's kind of like marketing, really, when you think about it. Like they have not marketed them well. At least these two guys from the 12.
Yeah, in both of them, you're left wondering, well, okay. Well, yeah, what was the point of that? Or why are you in the Bible?
They're both fun stories, but I don't see what they really get to the point to a canon.
And actually, that's one of the mysteries. We have no idea why the 12 exist. We have no idea who put them there, who decided.
Our next two will be Micah and Nahum, and maybe we'll get to Habakkuk in that one. Habakkuk is really interesting. I'm sure we'll get into the next one. There was actually in World War II a project to make a gigantic floating island out of ice that they could use as an aircraft carrier, and they called it the Habakkuk.
I remember that. It was a British project, wasn't it, or something, or a
Yeah.
joint British-American project. And they were going to fill it with sawdust and ice or something.
Yeah, they would freeze the sawdust and ice and make it almost like a modular thing, because when sawdust and ice come together, for some reason it doesn't thaw
Right.
at the same way that just plain old ice does.
Why did they call it Habakkuk?
I don't remember, but I think why they named that ship Habakkuk, but that's something we will definitely get into the next time. A very bizarre reference. Somebody was really paying attention.
Either someone's paying attention or it's meant as an incredibly deceptive name.
Or that's a very impressive name, Habakkuk.
Even more impressive because 99% of followers of the Bible would have no idea what Habakkuk is about.
Yeah, really. I mean, in the top of those 12, I would say there's really maybe 3 that are really household names. Maybe 4.
Which ones?
I would say if I were to Jonah, maybe Zechariah, and maybe those 2. Maybe I'll whittle that down to 2. Our job is going to make all 12 of them household names.
Fighting against 2,000 years of tradition. We've got quite a task.
We put Daniel on the map.
Yes, we did. Everyone had ignored that for 2,000 years.
And now Daniel's a household name.
Or at least hopefully people know more about Daniel than just Daniel in the Lion's Den.
Yeah, I think that and some future series that we have cooked up, I think that there will be plenty of history in the Bible and history of the Papacy collaborations for many years to come, because there's so much to mine out of this Old Testament, and we really haven't even scratched the New very much.
Oh, no, we haven't. That's a good point.
But if you're keeping up with the History in the Bible podcast, he's definitely getting into the New. All right, well, next time we will get into our next set of our 12 minor, and I don't like calling them minor prophets. What do you think, Garry?
I tend to use the Jewish tradition, and they're just called the 12. They're not the 12 prophets or the 12 minor prophets. They're just the 12.
They need something better than just the 12, though.
Oh, it's got an air of mystery to it, don't you think?
Yeah, the 12. But then in the Christian context, you get them confused with the 12 apostles.
Good point.
Well, if people want to delve even further into these prophets and much, 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 much more, how can they find out about your podcast?
They can go to www.historyinthebible.com.
And if you want to learn more about the history of the papacy, which we, as of late, haven't talked much about the papacy, but we're also a history of Christianity and the Christian church, you can go to a2zhistorypage.com. And we're very excited to see you next time.
Hey, wasn't there a Pope Zephaniah?
There was definitely Zacharias. I think, was there a Zephaniah? And we're going to have to look into that one. That's the next. I don't know how I would have missed that one. But you'll definitely find out about that and much, 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 much more next time.